Imagine coming back from a trip seeking peace of mind and finding your entire life thrown out on the sidewalk, your clothes trampled on, your sewing machine destroyed at the gate, and a cold note saying you're no longer part of the family. Sounds like something from a movie, but it's exactly what happened to a mother who dedicated her whole life to her son, who sewed at dawn to pay the bills, who gave up her own dreams to see him fulfilled. Kicked out of her own home by her ungrateful son and a gold-digger daughter-in-law who never hid her contempt. But what nobody expected was the shocking turn of events that was about to come. This is a real story of humiliation, betrayal, but also of such perfect justice that you won't believe it. Stay until the end, because what this elderly mother did when she discovered the truth will leave you speechless. But to understand how everything reached this point, I'll tell you how it all began. You know that moment when you come home expecting peace, a hug, maybe a hot cup of coffee on the table? Well, I was coming back from the spiritual retreat with a light heart, full of hope, believing I'd finally be able to reconnect with my family after so many months of tension. But when I turned the corner onto my street, something was wrong, terribly wrong. My clothes were scattered all over the sidewalk as if they were trash thrown out without the slightest care. My heart started racing. My legs were shaking as I got closer, and that's when I saw it. My sewing machine, the one that had sewn every dream, every paid bill, every mother's sacrifice, was broken, shattered there at the gate as if it was worth nothing. And attached to it, a note that froze my blood. You're no longer part of the family. Don't come back. The handwriting was my son Kaio's. I recognized it right away, and those words cut deeper than any knife could cut. What do you mean I'm not part of the family anymore? Me, who literally gave everything for him. I stood there, paralyzed, trying to process what my eyes were seeing and what my heart refused to believe. Neighbors passed by and looked away, embarrassed, and I realized this hadn't happened 5 minutes ago. My belongings had been there long enough for everyone to already know about my total humiliation. It was like the ground had opened up beneath my feet and I was falling into an endless pit. That woman who'd spent years sewing at dawn, who gave up her own dreams, who stayed up nights taking care of fevers, was now being treated like an intruder, like someone disposable. I grabbed the note with hands trembling so much I could barely hold the paper, looking for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, anything but the naked truth that was right in front of me. But there was no mistake. It was exactly what it looked like. My own son, the one I carried in my arms, who I taught to walk, who I protected from everything and everyone, had kicked me out of the house as if I were a burden. And worse, he'd done it while I was away, seeking a bit of spiritual peace, precisely because living at home had become unbearable in recent weeks. The irony hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Did he plan this? Did he wait for me to leave just to do this cowardly act? I looked at the house, my house, where I raised my son alone after becoming a widow, and noticed the curtains were different, that there was new furniture in the living room visible through the window. They hadn't just kicked me out, they'd renovated everything, erased any trace of me from that place, as if I'd never existed, as if all those years of sacrifice, all those sleepless nights sewing to pay the bills, all the love I poured into those walls simply meant nothing. My daughter-in-law Sophia had always been cold to me, always looked at me as if I were a burden, but I never imagined my own blood, my ungrateful son, would be capable of such cruelty. An elderly mother thrown out on the street as if she were nothing. Was this the reward for a lifetime of dedication? I tried to breathe deeply, but the air wouldn't quite reach my lungs. People passed by in a hurry, pretending not to see, and there I was, in the middle of that mess that was my belongings scattered around, feeling a pain so big it seemed physical. I picked up one of my blouses from the ground. It was dirty, trampled on, and it was at that moment that reality finally hit me full force. I had no home anymore, no family anymore, nothing anymore. Kaio had made a point of destroying my sewing machine, precisely the symbol of everything I'd built alone, as if he wanted to make it clear that my past of effort and dignity didn't matter anymore. This wasn't just an eviction, it was a message. You're worth nothing to us. My legs weakened and I almost fell right there, in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by the remains of my life. How do you recover from something like this? How does a mother process the fact that the son she raised, who she loved more than anything in this world, is capable of such coldness? I looked up at the sky searching for some answer, some sign that this was a nightmare I'd wake up from at any moment. But the afternoon was beautiful. The sun was shining as if nothing major was happening, as if my world hadn't just collapsed. And there, holding that cruel note, with my broken machine at my feet and my clothes scattered on the street, I realized this wasn't just an eviction. It was a declaration that I didn't matter anymore. You know what's most painful about all this? It's not even the humiliation of being there on the street, exposed for the neighbors to see and comment on. It's not even the disrespect of having my belongings thrown out like trash. What really hurts, what cuts the soul, is realizing that to my gold-digger daughter-in-law and my ungrateful son, I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Me, who literally gave my life for him, who gave up rebuilding my life after I became a widow just to dedicate myself to being a mother, was now seen as a problem to be solved. And as I gathered strength to at least pick up some things from the ground, part of me wondered, is he inside now, relieved to have gotten me out of the way? Does he feel anything, or has that woman's influence completely erased the son I raised? I wiped away the tears that kept falling and forced my feet to move. I needed to collect at least the essentials before it got dark, before it rained, before it got even worse than it already was. But where would I go? Who would take me in at this age, without a house, without money, without anything? The retreat had been my last attempt to find inner peace, to reconnect with myself, and maybe even improve the relationship with my daughter-in-law and my son. What bitter irony! While I was seeking peace and spiritual harmony, they were planning my expulsion. And now, standing there in the middle of that devastating scene, with my hands full of dirty clothes and my heart shattered, I wondered, how do you rebuild a life when your own son, the one who should protect you, is the one who destroys you? How does a mother move forward after discovering that all her love, all her sacrifice, wasn't enough to guarantee even a minimum of respect? I started gathering my things mechanically, one piece at a time, without really knowing what I was doing. And it was exactly at that moment, when I was at rock bottom, thinking there was nobody left in the world who cared about me, that I heard a voice behind me that would change everything. But to understand how someone can sink so low as to kick their own mother out of the house, I need to tell you how we got here. Because this emotional story didn't start that day on the sidewalk. It comes from much further back, from years of dedication that were ignored, from signs I should have noticed, and from a gold-digger daughter-in-law who from the beginning had very clear plans for the future. And believe me, what happened after this cruel discovery was even more shocking than you can imagine. Because when you hit rock bottom, only two options remain: stay down there or find the strength to climb back up. And what nobody expected, not even myself, was that a humiliated elderly mother still had so much strength stored up. Laura, my God, what did they do to you? Donna Teresa's voice cut through the silence and made me lift my head. My neighbor was running down the sidewalk with that hurried manner of someone who doesn't think twice before helping someone in trouble. She looked at me, then at my belongings scattered around, then at my destroyed sewing machine, and I saw in her eyes the same indignation I felt inside. I didn't need to say anything. She understood everything in that instant. "Come on, let's get these things out of here before it gets worse," she said, already bending down to pick up my clothes from the ground. And you know what moved me most? She didn't ask questions, didn't want to know details, didn't look at me with pity or judgment. She simply acted, as if helping an elderly mother in despair was the most natural thing in the world. I tried to speak, to thank her, to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat was closed from crying so much, from swallowing so much anger, from accumulated humiliation. Donna Teresa must have noticed, because she just shook her head and continued collecting my things carefully, folding each piece as if they were treasures and not rags thrown on the street by an ungrateful son. "You don't need to say anything now, dear. Let's take everything to my house and then we'll talk calmly," she whispered, placing her hand on my shoulder with a tenderness that made me break down completely. It was there, with that simple gesture of solidarity, that I realized not everything was lost. There were still good people in this world, people who cared, even when your own family threw you out like trash. We started carrying the bags together, and other neighbors who passed by looked away, clearly embarrassed by the situation, but without the courage to get involved. Donna Teresa noticed and muttered quietly, "It's always like this. Everyone sees, Everyone knows, but nobody has the courage to face injustice head on. That made me think about how many times I myself had turned away from difficult situations, afraid to meddle where I wasn't called. And now, it was me who desperately needed this help, this courage from someone who had nothing to do with my story, but decided to extend her hand anyway. We carried everything we could carry: clothes, some books, papers, small objects that represented pieces of my life, and left behind the broken sewing machine, too heavy to be transported, and frankly, too painful to look at. When we finally entered Donna Teresa's house, she made me sit on the sofa, brought a glass of water, and sat next to me without saying anything for a few minutes. She just stayed there, in silence, respecting my pain, giving me space to breathe and process everything that had happened. You know when you meet someone who understands that sometimes words don't help, that presence is already enough? It was exactly that. After a while, when I managed to drink a few sips of water, she finally asked, "It was Kayo, wasn't it?" I nodded, and she closed her eyes as if feeling physical pain. "I saw when they started throwing your things out the window last night. I almost went there to knock on the door, but I thought you were inside agreeing with some change. I never imagined it was an eviction. Last night. They'd started last night. While I was still at the retreat, meditating, seeking inner peace and ways to improve our family relationship, my son and my gold-digger daughter-in-law were already executing the plan to get me out of the house. The coldness of it hit me like a punch in the stomach. It wasn't an impulsive act, a fight that got out of control. It was calculated, planned, executed with the precision of someone who feels absolutely nothing. Donna Teresa must have seen my face contort in pain because she held my hand and squeezed it hard. "You're going to stay here as long as you need, you hear? I have an extra room, small but comfortable, and you're more than welcome. Nobody deserves to go through this, much less a woman who worked her whole life to raise a son alone." Now, how did she know all this? Of course, we'd been neighbors for years. She'd seen my struggle since I became a widow. She'd seen the lights on, laid in my house when I sewed to pay the bills. She'd seen Kayo grow up and graduate. She knew my story, even though we'd never been close friends. And now she was there, offering not just a roof, but also words that were starting to light a small flame inside me. A strange mixture of anger, indignation, and surprisingly, hope. "But I can't pay rent. I don't have anything," I started to say, but she interrupted me with a firm hand gesture. "I don't want to hear about money now. First, you're going to rest, recover from this shock, and then we'll see what to do. Nobody makes important decisions with a broken heart." She was right, but part of me couldn't simply accept defeat. While she went to prepare the room for me, I sat there on the sofa, looking at the bags with my belongings piled up in the corner of the living room. Everything I'd built in years of hard work fit in a few miserable bags. How do you get to this point? How does a son look at his own mother and decide she doesn't deserve even a little corner in the house she helped pay for? Anger was starting to replace sadness, and I realized that feeling of helplessness was gradually giving way to something different, a desire to understand, to discover how everything had reached that point. Because one thing I knew, an ungrateful son isn't born overnight. Something had happened. Someone had planted this seed of cruelty in my Kayo's heart. And while Donna Teresa came back with clean sheets and a gentle smile, saying the room was ready, I realized I wasn't just going to accept that and move on. No, I needed to understand when everything started going wrong, when I lost my son to the influence of a gold-digger daughter-in-law, when I went from being the loved mother to becoming the burden that needed to be removed. And more importantly, I needed to decide what to do from there. Because if there's one thing an elderly mother learns after so much time living, it's that you can be knocked down, humiliated, destroyed, but never ever should you accept being discarded without fighting. And the fight, I was starting to realize, might just be beginning. In the following days, while trying to adapt to the borrowed room in Donna Teresa's house, my mind couldn't stop going back in time. You know when you start putting together the pieces of a puzzle and realize the horrible image was always there, you just refused to see it? That's exactly what was happening to me. Every strange conversation, every cold look, every seemingly innocent comment from Sophia now made sense within a bigger plan. And the worst part was realizing the signs had always been there, screaming in my face. But I was too busy being a mother, being understanding, being patient, to pay attention to what really mattered. I clearly remembered when everything started to change. At first, when they came to live with me, Sophia even pretended to be polite, but within the first few weeks, the subtle criticisms about my food began. "Laura, don't you think this rice and beans came out a bit bland? At my mother's house, we use more seasonings." They were small comments, said with a fake little smile, but they poked at my self-esteem in a way only another woman knows how to do. And the worst part? Caio never defended me. He'd just sit there, eating quietly, as if it had nothing to do with him, sometimes even nodding in agreement, as if my food that had fed him for years with so much love suddenly wasn't good enough anymore. Then came the criticisms about the house, and even worse, the distancing regarding my little granddaughter Clara. Sophia started inventing excuses not to leave the girl with me. "Oh, Laura, not today. Her routine is all messed up." Or, "Better not. She's in a phase where she's very shy with people." Over time, I realized that gold-digger daughter-in-law was literally isolating me from Clara, and the worst part was seeing my ungrateful son agreeing with all of it, as if I were really a danger to my own granddaughter. There was a day I overheard by accident Sophia talking on the phone. "I'm trying to gradually distance Clara from Laura. I don't want my daughter growing up thinking that old-fashioned way of living is normal." There were also those increasingly frequent conversations about me seeking my independence. Sophia started dropping comments like, "Laura, have you thought about renting a small apartment just for yourself? It would be so nice for you to have your privacy." Or, "There are some really nice retirement homes nowadays, places where you could socialize with people your age." Retirement home? I wasn't an elderly mother incapable of taking care of myself. But she was planting these ideas in Caio's head, and I saw in his eyes that he was starting to consider it as a real possibility, as if getting me out of the house would be a favor they'd be doing for me. And I, like an idiot, tried to be understanding, swallowed every humiliation, every slight, every mean comment, all in the name of keeping the peace, of not being the problematic mother-in-law. What a monumental mistake, because the more I gave in, the more they advanced, the smaller I made myself, the more they treated me as insignificant. I should have set limits from the beginning, should have confronted that gold-digger daughter-in-law when the first barbs started appearing. But no, I chose silence, chose to swallow it, chose to believe that if I was patient and loving enough, things would naturally improve. And look what happened. Now, looking back with the cruel clarity that only pain brings, I saw everything with such sharpness it physically hurt. Every ignored sign, every accepted disrespect, every boundary not established had paved the way for that horrible day when I found my belongings on the street. The signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them because seeing meant confronting, and confronting meant possibly losing my son. Ironic, right? In the end, I lost him anyway, but this time without even having tried to fight. And while this awareness weighed on my chest, a question started eating away at me inside. Did they really plan all this in advance, or was it an impulsive decision that could be reversed? It was Donna Teresa herself who started telling me what the neighbors had seen while I was at the retreat. She hesitated at first, as if afraid of hurting me even more, but I insisted. I needed to know the truth, however painful it might be. And the truth, my God, was much worse than I imagined. That hadn't been an impulsive act, a fight that got out of control, a moment of anger that made my ungrateful son lose his head. No, that was planned, calculated, executed with the coldness of someone who was just getting rid of a problem. "Laura, I saw everything," Donna Teresa began, serving hot tea while choosing her words carefully. "The day after you left for the retreat, they started the moving around. First, a truck came and took several pieces of furniture. Your dresser, that old living room cabinet, even some chairs. I felt my stomach turn. They'd started the next day? I'd barely had time to arrive at the retreat, and they were already dismantling my life? Then the painters came. They changed the color of the walls, tore down that wallpaper in the living room you liked so much," she continued, and each word was like a stab. But the worst was still to come. Donna Teresa told me she'd seen a locksmith arriving to change all the locks in the house. All of them. As if I were an intruder, a threat, someone who needed to be kept outside at all costs. And Sophia was there, supervising everything, giving orders, rearranging the furniture, she said, shaking her head with indignation. Caio was there too, of course, but she was the one in charge of everything. I even heard her talking on the phone, all excited, saying they'd finally have the house just for themselves. My gold-digger daughter-in-law hadn't just planned my expulsion. She'd celebrated it, had rejoiced as if it were a great achievement. Other neighbors started confirming the story when they saw me on the street in the following days. Donna Maria, who lived 3 houses down, stopped me to say she'd seen Sophia selling my furniture on the internet. "I recognize that beautiful sideboard you had, Laura. I saw it in the neighborhood sales group, and when I asked if it was yours, she said they were old furniture pieces she was getting rid of. She didn't even mention they were yours." The total humiliation of knowing my belongings, things I'd bought with so much effort, were being sold as if they were old junk was almost unbearable. And all this while I was away, seeking spiritual peace, completely oblivious to what was happening. Mr. João, who had a grocery store on the corner, also had something to say. "I delivered some groceries there last week and found it strange not to see you. I asked about you, and Sophia said, all casual, that you'd gone to live with some relatives and wouldn't be coming back. So that was it. They were already spreading a version of the story, a convenient lie to justify my disappearance. And Caio, my own son, was there agreeing with everything, letting his wife build this false narrative where I'd simply chosen to leave, as if I hadn't been kicked out of my own house. The coldness, the premeditation, the organized lie, all of it revealed a level of cruelty I never imagined my son was capable of. As I listened to each account, each detail of this meticulously executed plan, something inside me started to change. The sadness was still there, of course, heavy like a stone on my chest, but along with it came a growing anger, an indignation that heated my blood and made me clench my fists. They'd planned everything down to the smallest detail, had treated me like a burden to be removed, had even invented lies to cover their actions. And you know what outraged me most? It was realizing that while I was at a retreat, trying to improve as a person, trying to find peace to live better with them, my gold-digger daughter-in-law and my ungrateful son were busy erasing any trace of my existence in that house. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that I had my own secrets kept, and maybe it was time to use that to my advantage. There are things in life you keep to yourself, you know? Not out of malice, not out of distrust, but because you learn that not everything needs to be shared, especially when you start feeling something isn't right. And I had my secrets, secrets that neither Caio, much less that gold-digger daughter-in-law, had the slightest idea existed. While everyone thought I was just an elderly mother who depended totally on her son, who lived there as a favor, who had nowhere to go, the truth was quite different. In recent months, since I noticed Sophia's first barbs, since I felt my son's distancing, I'd started quietly preparing for the worst. I didn't know I'd be kicked out in that brutal way, but my survival instinct, the same one that made me raise a son alone after becoming a widow, had started screaming that I needed a plan B. I started saving money. Not much because my sewing jobs didn't pay fortunes, but every penny left over I hid in a place nobody would ever think to look. I had an old cookie tin at the back of my closet, inside a box with fabric scraps that Sophia would never touch because she thought all of it was old and useless. Inside there, carefully folded, were my savings, 5, 10, 20 real bills, collected over months. It wasn't a fortune, far from it, but it was mine. It was hard-earned. It was honest. It was proof that even being treated like a burden, I still had my dignity, my work, my independence, and thank God I'd had the presence of mind to grab that tin when Donna Teresa helped me collect my belongings from the street. But money wasn't my only secret. In the last 3 months, I'd started visiting a place downtown, a small studio that was for rent. It was a simple space, but with good natural light, on the second floor of an old commercial building with a large room that would be perfect for putting some sewing machines and teaching classes. I'd go there secretly, telling Caio I was going shopping or visiting an old client. I'd stand there looking through the window, imagining what it would be like to transform that space into a place of my own, where I could teach other women to sew, where I could start over away from that toxic atmosphere my house had become. The property owner, Mr. Alberto, was a kind gentleman who always greeted me when he saw me there, and sometimes we even talked about my intentions. "You have a knack for this, Donna Laura," he'd told me once. "Teaching is a gift, and sewing is a skill many people would like to learn. If you decide to rent, we can work out a good price to get started." Those words had planted a seed in my heart, The idea that maybe I could have a life beyond being a mother, beyond being the unwanted mother-in-law, beyond being the elderly mother who was becoming a burden. I started fantasizing about the possibility of having my own business, my own space, my own identity that didn't depend on anyone. Of course, back then, I still had hope that things would improve at home, that Caio would go back to valuing me, that Sophia would stop with the digs. But unconsciously, I was already preparing for a life without them. I also had some contacts I'd been discreetly cultivating. Old clients who always praised my work and said they'd like to learn to sew. Women from the church I attended who kept asking me if I wouldn't give private lessons. Even a social worker I met at a community event who told me there was a lot of demand for vocational courses for women in vulnerable situations. If you open a little sewing school, I can refer students to you through the city's social program, she'd said, giving me her card. I kept that card as if it were gold, along with the names and phone numbers of other people who'd shown interest. It was my invisible safety net, built without fanfare, without anyone knowing. Sophia and Caio thought I had nothing besides them, that I depended totally on their kindness in letting me live there. What an illusion. I had much more than they imagined. I had experience, I had skills, I had contacts, I had a small financial reserve, and above all, I had willpower. What I lacked before the eviction was courage to take the step, courage to break with that toxic family dynamic and seek my independence. But now, thrown on the street like trash, treated as disposable by my own ungrateful son, that courage had come in a brutal way, but it had come. And as I stayed in Donna Teresa's room, mentally reviewing everything I'd kept secret, I realized that maybe that eviction, as painful as it was, could be the push I needed to finally live for myself. I grabbed the cookie tin and opened it carefully, counting the money I'd managed to save. It wasn't enough to rent the studio yet, but it was a start. I grabbed the crumpled social worker's card and the papers with notes about the space I'd visited. All of it was real. It was tangible. It was possible. It was no longer just a vague dream of an elderly mother who thought she'd never have the courage to start over. It was a concrete plan that now had an urgent reason to be put into practice. And for the first time since I'd found my belongings on the street, I felt something beyond pain and anger. I felt hope. Small, timid, but real. Maybe it wasn't time to act yet. Maybe I needed more information, more resources, more courage. But the seed was planted. What Caio and Sophia didn't know was that while they were planning my expulsion, I was unconsciously planting the seeds of my new beginning. While they saw me as a burden to be removed, I was discovering I had wings I hadn't used yet. And while that gold-digger daughter-in-law celebrated having managed to get me out of the house, I was starting to understand that maybe that house was never really my prison. The prison was my own belief that I needed them more than they needed me. But what if there was something more? What if I could turn this game around? What if there was a card up my sleeve I didn't even know I had? Something that could completely change this emotional story of humiliation into a story of turnaround and justice. I put everything back carefully, hid the tin at the bottom of my suitcase, and lay down on that borrowed bed with my mind buzzing with possibilities. Tomorrow I'd start investigating my options better. I'd call the social worker, I'd go back to talk with Mr. Alberto about the studio, I'd see how much more I needed to be able to take that step. But before all that, before planning my future, I needed to better understand my present. I needed to know exactly what my rights were, what I could do legally about that eviction, if there was any way to protect myself or even fight back. And that's when I had an idea. What if I looked for a lawyer? Not necessarily to fight, but to understand my situation. After all, can a son really kick his own mother out of the house just like that? Out of the blue? Something told me that maybe, just maybe, there was much more to this story than I was seeing. Donna Teresa knew a lawyer, Dr. Marcos, who handled family cases and had a reputation for being honest and straightforward. He doesn't charge for the initial consultation, Laura. Go talk to him. Explain your situation. It costs nothing to know your rights, she insisted, and I finally agreed. The next morning, I got myself ready as best I could with the wrinkled clothes I'd managed to save, pulled my hair into a bun, and went to his office downtown. My heart was beating fast, part anxiety, part shame at having to expose my situation to a stranger, part hope that maybe there was something I could do. When I entered the simple but organized office, Dr. Marcos greeted me with a kind smile and offered me coffee. Donna Laura, Sit down and tell me everything from the beginning. Take your time, don't be ashamed. Unfortunately, cases like yours are more common than we'd like. I told him everything. From the spiritual retreat, through discovering my belongings on the street, the broken sewing machine, the cruel note from my ungrateful son, to the neighbors' accounts of how everything had been planned while I was away. Marcos listened attentively, taking notes, frowning at some moments, shaking his head at others. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds, as if organizing his thoughts. Dona Laura, I'm going to need to ask some questions that might seem invasive, but they're important. Do you have any documents for the house? Any deed? Any proof? I said I wasn't sure, that everything had been left behind, but that I thought the house was in my late husband's name. And after he passed away, was there probate? Was the inheritance divided? That's when I started remembering things I'd buried deep in my memory. After my husband died, a lawyer had taken care of the probate. It was a simple situation. We only had that house, no other significant assets. I vaguely remembered signing papers, lots of papers, at a time when I was so devastated by the loss I barely paid attention to what I was doing. The lawyer said everything was settled, that the house would be guaranteed for me and Caio, I said, trying to pull the details from memory. Dr. Marcos leaned forward, his eyes shining with interest. Dona Laura, this is very important. If the house went through probate and you signed as an heir along with your son, there's a strong possibility that the property is registered in both your names, or even just in your name, depending on how it was done. He picked up the phone and called someone, asking them to check the property registration at the registry office. While we waited, Dr. Marcos explained to me that if the house was totally or partially in my name, the eviction Caio had done was completely illegal. Nobody can evict a property owner from their own house, Dona Laura, not even a son. If we confirm you have rights to the property, the situation changes completely. My heart raced. Could it be possible? After everything that had happened, after being treated like disposable trash, could it be possible that I had the legal right to return? No. More than that, could it be possible that actually it was Caio who was living in my house and not the other way around? The irony of it all was so great, I almost let out a nervous laugh. Half an hour later, the phone rang. Doctor, Marcos answered, listened, asked some questions, wrote down information, and when he hung up, he had a wide smile on his face. Dona Laura, I have news that's going to completely change this story. The house is registered entirely in your name. I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet, but this time in a good way, in a way that made my heart explode with a mixture of relief and disbelief. What do you mean in my name? But my husband, Dr. Marcos gently interrupted me. Apparently, in the probate, since you were the wife and mother of the minor heir at the time, and since there was only this one asset, everything was registered in your name to guarantee housing for both of you. It's a common procedure in cases like this. That meant that during all these years, while Caio grew up thinking the house was his, while Sophia planned to kick me out thinking she had that right, while I myself believed I was there out of their kindness, the truth was completely different. The house was mine. Legally, totally, unquestionably mine. Caio had no right to kick me out. Actually, it was he who was living in my house. It was he who depended on my goodwill, not the other way around. The discovery was so absurd, so unexpected, that I started laughing and crying at the same time. All that total humiliation, all that pain of being treated as disposable, all that agony of having nowhere to go, all of it was based on a lie, on an illusion that all of us, including me, had believed. Dr. Marcos let me process the information for a few minutes before continuing. Now, Dona Laura, you need to decide what you want to do. I can send an extrajudicial notification to your son, informing him that he committed unlawful dispossession, which is illegally expelling the property owner, and demanding that he return your keys, replace your belongings, and, if necessary, even leave the house. Or, he continued, I could simply return to the house with the police if necessary, since I had every legal right to be there. But there was also a third option. I could use this information as bargaining power, negotiate terms that favored me, establish clear boundaries. The possibilities spun in my head like a whirlwind. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Just my rights back? Or something bigger? I left that office with a folder full of documents proving the house was mine, with Dr. Marcos's card in my pocket and a completely new feeling in my chest. It wasn't despair anymore. It wasn't just pain. It was power. For the first time since I'd found my belongings on the street, I had something concrete in my hands, something that completely changed the game. My ungrateful son and my gold-digger daughter-in-law had kicked me out thinking I had nowhere to go, that I was a dependent elderly mother without options. They'd completely underestimated who I was, what I'd built, and especially what my rights were. And now, walking back to Donna Teresa's house with the cool breeze on my face and a discreet smile on my lips, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The question now wasn't, how am I going to survive this? The question was, how am I going to use this to my advantage? And while I planned my next steps, one thing became increasingly clear. This emotional story was far, very far from over. Actually, it was just starting to get interesting. Because there's one thing my son and that woman didn't know about me. I wasn't just a mother who loved unconditionally. I was also a woman who'd learned to survive alone, who'd raised a son in the worst conditions, who'd built a life from scratch after becoming a widow. And when a woman like that is pushed against the wall, when she's humiliated and discarded, she doesn't crumble. She rises stronger than ever. Now it was my turn to play, and this time I had all the cards in my hand. I spent the entire night awake, but this time it wasn't from despair, it was from planning. Dr. Marcos had given me all the options, but the final decision was mine, and I needed to think clearly, without letting emotion completely dominate me. Of course, part of me wanted revenge, wanted to see the shocked faces of Caio and Sophia when they discovered the truth. But another part, the part that had been a mother all those years, still felt a pang of pain imagining the confrontation. Could there still be salvation for this relationship? If I simply talked to them, showed them the documents, would they apologize, and everything would go back to normal? Donna Teresa, when I told her about the discovery, was direct. Laura dear, people who do what they did don't change just because you have a paper in your hand. You need to protect yourself first, forgive later, if that's the case. She was right, and deep down I knew it. The next morning, I went back to Dr. Marcos's office with my decision made. I want you to send an extrajudicial notification. I demand they leave the house in 30 days, that they return or pay for my belongings that were sold or destroyed, including my sewing machine. And I want it to be very clear in the document that the house is mine, that the eviction was illegal, and that I'm being generous in giving this deadline instead of simply returning with the police. Dr. Marcos smiled, writing everything down. Perfect. I'll draft it today and send it through a court officer. In 48 hours, they'll have the document in their hands. Before signing the authorization, I took a deep breath. There was no going back after that. I was officially declaring war against my own son. But what choice did they give me? They kicked an elderly mother out on the street, destroyed her belongings, sold her things. No, I wasn't being cruel. I was just demanding the minimum of justice and respect. 2 days later, Dr. Marcos called me. It was delivered. The officer informed me that the person who answered was a woman, probably your daughter-in-law, and that she went pale when she read the document. I tried to imagine the scene. Sophia opening the door, receiving that official envelope, reading the first lines and realizing the house of cards she'd built was collapsing. Did she call Caio running? Did they read it together, incredulous, realizing they'd made a monumental mistake? Part of me felt a bitter satisfaction with that, but another part, the one that was still a mother, felt a tightness in my chest. This wasn't how I wanted things to be, but it was how they chose for them to be. Now we wait, Dr. Marcos advised me. They'll probably try to contact you. I suggest any conversation be done in the presence of witnesses or documented in writing. It didn't take even 6 hours. My phone rang. It was Caio. My heart raced when I saw his name on the screen, and for a moment I hesitated to answer. But I answered, putting it on speakerphone as Dr. Marcos had advised me, with Donna Teresa by my side as a witness. Mom, what's this story? What notification is this? His voice was a mixture of confusion and indignation, as if I were the one doing something wrong. I took a deep breath before responding. It's exactly what's written there, Caio. The house is mine. It always was, and you evicted me illegally. Now I'm demanding my rights back. There was silence on the other end, and then I heard Sophia's voice in the background, saying something I couldn't fully understand. Mom, this is a misunderstanding. We didn't kick you out. We thought it would be better for you to have your space, your independence. That was the last straw. Misunderstanding? My voice came out louder than I intended. Throwing my belongings on the street is a misunderstanding? Destroying my sewing machine is a misunderstanding? Leaving me a note saying I'm no longer part of the family is a misunderstanding, Kayo? On the other end of the line, silence. You had plenty of time to do this right, to talk to me like adults, to find a solution together. But you chose the path of cruelty and humiliation. Now, you'll have to deal with the consequences. I heard Sophia saying something hurried in the background, and then Kayo came back. Mom, wait, let's talk. We can resolve this another way. What if we paid rent to continue living there? We can make a contract, everything proper. So that was it. Now that they'd discovered the house was mine, suddenly they wanted to negotiate, wanted to be civilized. Rent? I almost laughed. Do you really think this is about money? You treated me like trash, like a disposable elderly mother. You humiliated me in front of all the neighbors, sold my furniture, destroyed my things. And now you think you can just pay rent and everything's okay? My voice trembled, not from fear, but from a righteous anger that came from a very deep place. No, Kayo, this isn't about money. It's about respect, about dignity, about everything you took from me when you decided I was worth nothing. The notification stands, 30 days to leave the house. Another attempt from him. Mom, please, think about Clara. Do you want to do this to your granddaughter? Take her away from the house where she grew up? Using the little granddaughter as an argument was too low, and he knew it. Don't try to put that on me, I responded firmly. Who thought about Clara when they threw her grandmother on the street? Who thought about her when you distanced me from her in recent months? You made choices, Kayo, and now you have to live with them. Clara will be fine. Children are resilient, but I'm not backing down on my decision. I heard Sophia shouting something in the background, angry words I couldn't fully distinguish, but the tone was unmistakable. It was pure hatred. Kayo tried one more time. We can pay for your furniture, we can buy a new machine, we can... I interrupted him. 30 days, Kayo. It's all in the notification. If you have anything to say, talk to my lawyer. And I hung up, with my hands shaking, but my heart strangely relieved. Donna Teresa hugged me in silence, and I let the tears fall, not from sadness this time, but from a strange and painful liberation. In the following days, there were more attempts. Calls I didn't answer, messages I read but didn't respond to, even a visit from Sophia to Donna Teresa's house that resulted in Donna Teresa literally closing the door in her face after hearing a bunch of insults. That woman is venomous, Laura. She called you manipulative, a gold digger. Imagine, you who own the house being called a gold digger. She said you'd always been a burden, that Kayo only put up with you all these years out of pity. Each word was a stab, but strangely they didn't hurt as much as they should anymore. Maybe because now I saw that gold digger daughter-in-law for what she really was, a small, petty person who only felt big by diminishing others. And my ungrateful son? Well, he'd made his choice when he decided to stay on her side instead of his own mother's side. The deadline kept passing. 20 days, 15 days, 10 days. Dr. Marcos informed me they'd looked for a lawyer too, trying to find some legal loophole, some way to contest. But there was nothing to contest. The house was mine, period. The eviction had been illegal. The damage to my belongings was provable through the neighbors' testimonies. They didn't have a leg to stand on in a legal battle. On the 25th day, I received one last message from Kayo. We're going to leave on time, but I want you to know you destroyed this family. Clara will grow up without knowing her grandmother because of you. I read that and felt a pang of pain, but didn't respond, because it wasn't true. I hadn't destroyed anything. They had destroyed it when they threw me on the street. I was just, finally, defending myself. And as I counted down the last days to the final deadline, I started planning not just my return to the house, but something much bigger, an entirely new life. The day finally came, the 30th day, the final deadline. Dr. Marcos had advised me to go to the house accompanied, so he, Donna Teresa, and a court officer accompanied me to the door that had been mine for so many years. My heart was beating hard, a mixture of anxiety, fear, and a determination I'd never felt before. When we arrived, I saw there was a moving truck parked in front, and some furniture was already being loaded. Sophia passed by me carrying a box. shot me a look of pure hatred, but didn't say a word. Caio appeared at the door, holding Clara in his arms, and when our eyes met, I saw something that could be regret, or maybe it was just contained anger. "Everything's ready. We're leaving today," he said coldly, without calling me Mom, without showing any emotion beyond resentment. I nodded, unable to speak, looking at my little granddaughter who stared at me confused. I entered the house after they left, and what I saw broke my heart in a different way. They'd taken almost everything. The new furniture they'd bought, the curtains, even some things that were originally mine, but they must have thought they had a right to. The walls had the new paint, but they were empty without the pictures I'd hung over the years. The wooden floor I'd waxed so many times was scratched in some places where they'd dragged furniture in a hurry and anger. I went to what used to be my room and saw it was completely empty. Not even my bed had survived. They'd obviously sold or thrown it away along with my other belongings. The house looked like a skeleton, a ghost version of the home it had been. But it was mine, finally, unquestionably mine. And as I ran my hand over the empty walls, I felt not sadness, but relief. That space was clean now, ready to be rebuilt the way I wanted. Donna Teresa came in behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. "They made a point of leaving it as empty as possible, huh? Pure pettiness." It was true, but in a way that even made things easier. I didn't want to live surrounded by painful memories, by objects that would constantly remind me of my ungrateful son's betrayal. Starting from scratch would actually be better. Dr. Marcos did a complete inspection, photographing everything, documenting the damage and what had been taken improperly. "We can file a compensation lawsuit for your belongings if you want," he suggested. I thought for a moment and shook my head. No, I want to close this cycle, not prolong it. Let them take what they took. What I really need, I'll build again. And it was true. Objects can be replaced. What can't be replaced is dignity, respect, peace of mind. And those things, finally, I was recovering. That same week, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I put the house up for sale. Donna Teresa was shocked. "Laura, but you fought so hard to get the house back. Why sell now?" I explained that house was full of ghosts, not just of the son who betrayed me, but also of the husband I lost, of the woman I was and was no longer. I needed a complete restart, not just to recover what I'd lost. "I'm going to use the money from the sale to realize a dream I've been keeping for a while," I told her, my eyes shining with an excitement I hadn't felt in years. And that's exactly what I did. The house sold quickly. It was a good property, well located, and even needing some repairs, it attracted interested buyers. When I signed the deed of sale and received the check, I looked at that piece of paper and saw not the end of an era, but the beginning of another. With the money from the sale, the first thing I did was go back downtown to that old commercial building where the studio I'd visited secretly months ago was located. Mr. Alberto, the owner, was delighted when I explained that now I was really ready to rent the space. "Donna Laura, what joy! You know, I almost rented this space last month, but something told me to wait a little longer. I think it was meant for you." We closed the contract right there, and when I received the keys to that spacious space full of natural light, with the smell of new beginnings, the tears came, but they were tears of pure joy. There weren't any painful memories there. There weren't any ghosts from the past. There it was a blank canvas where I could paint whatever future I wanted. And for the first time in a long time, that future seemed bright. In the following months, I worked harder than I'd ever worked before. But this time it was different, because I was working for myself, for my dream, for my legacy. I bought 3 new sewing machines, including an industrial one I'd always wanted to have, organized the space into workstations, put pictures on the walls with motivational phrases, set up a small, cozy reception area. I contacted the social worker who'd given me her card months ago, and she was incredible. She helped me register the studio as a partner in social programs, referred the first students to me, women in vulnerable situations who needed to learn a profession to restart their lives. And you know what the most beautiful part was? Realizing that by teaching these women to sew, by sharing my experience and my skills, I was doing much more than transmitting technical knowledge. I was showing them that new beginnings are possible, that age isn't a limitation, that pain can be transformed into purpose. The official opening of Studio New Beginning, a name I chose with much affection, was on a beautiful Saturday night. I decorated everything with great care, prepared some snacks, even put on a small fashion show of pieces the first students had sewn. Donna Teresa was there, of course, as proud as if the studio were hers too. Old neighbors came, clients I'd served over the years, the social worker with 2 more colleagues interested in partnerships, and even Mr. Alberto with his wife. I looked around at that space full of people, full of life, full of possibilities, and could barely believe that just a few months ago I was on the street with my belongings scattered, thinking my life had ended. The truth is, my life hadn't ended. It was just waiting for me to have the courage to start over, in a better way, more true, more mine. During the opening, one of my students, Donna Mariana, asked to speak. She was a woman of about 50 who'd left an abusive relationship and was trying to rebuild her life from scratch. "I want to thank Laura for much more than teaching us to sew," she said, with a choked voice. "She taught us that it's never too late to start over, that we don't have to accept being treated as if we're worth nothing, and that every stitch we make on the machine is also a stitch in rebuilding who we are." I was crying. Everyone was crying. And at that moment, I realized that yes, everything had been worth it. The pain of my son's rejection, the humiliation of the eviction, the loneliness of the first nights, all of it had brought me here, to this space where I was no longer just someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's victim. I was Laura, owner of my own nose, my own business, my own destiny. That night, when everyone had already left and I was alone in the studio, I sat in one of the chairs and looked around with a smile on my face. I thought about Caio, about Sophia, and strangely, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt almost a bitter gratitude, because if they hadn't kicked me out, if they hadn't forced me to hit rock bottom, maybe I never would have found the courage to fly. Of course, the pain of losing my son was still there. It probably always would be, but it didn't define me anymore. I'd created something bigger than that pain. I'd created purpose, community, legacy. And as I turned off the lights and locked the door of my studio, my realized dream, my materialized new beginning, I knew the story was far from over. Actually, it had barely begun. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what lay ahead, because now I was in control of my own narrative. But would Caio come back? Would there be some form of reconciliation? And if there were, would I be ready for that? It was almost 6 months of absolute silence. 6 months in which I built my new life brick by brick, stitch by stitch, without any contact with Caio or Sophia. The studio was thriving, my students increasing every week, and I'd finally rented a small but cozy apartment with a balcony full of plants where I had coffee every morning feeling at peace. I'd even adopted a cat, Seamstress, a name the students chose that drew laughs from everyone. My life was good, even complete, but it would be a lie to say I didn't miss Clara, that I didn't catch myself thinking about how she'd be growing up if she still remembered me. Donna Teresa said it was natural, that a grandmother's love doesn't fade away so easily. But you did the right thing, Laura. You established your boundaries, protected your dignity. If he wants to come back, let him come back acknowledging the mistake, not trying to justify it. And then, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, while I was teaching basic sewing to a new group, my cell phone rang. It was a number I knew by heart, even having deleted it from my contacts. Caio. My heart jumped, my hands started trembling, and for an instant I thought about not answering. But something told me it was important. I excused myself to the students, went to the back room and answered. "Hello?" My voice came out firmer than I expected. On the other end, Caio's voice, but different, without arrogance, without coldness, just tired. "Mom, it's me. I know I have no right to call. I know you probably don't want to talk to me. But I need to see you. I need to talk." I stayed silent, processing, and he continued. "It's not to ask for anything. It's not to try to come back to the house or anything like that. It's just, I need to apologize to you. Truly, face to face." I didn't respond right away. I said I needed to think, that he'd hurt me too much for me to simply accept a conversation like that out of nowhere. "I understand," he said, and for the first time in years I heard something like genuine regret in his voice. "I'll send you my new address by message. If you want, if you can forgive me enough to at least hear me out, show up when you feel ready. No pressure, no expectations. Just, please, think about it kindly." I hung up and sat there, the phone in my hand, my heart confused. Part of me wanted to ignore it, move on, leave that chapter closed forever. But another part, that part that was still a mother despite everything, wanted to understand, wanted to hear, wanted at least to have a better closure than that bitter day when they left the house. I talked to Donna Teresa, to Dr. Marcos, to some closer students. Everyone said the same thing. Only you can decide this, Laura. It took me 2 weeks to gather courage, 2 weeks rehearsing what I'd say, imagining scenarios, preparing myself emotionally for anything. When I finally decided to go, I asked Donna Teresa to come with me and wait at a nearby cafe, a safety net in case I needed to run out or if the conversation went sour. The address Caio had sent was for a small apartment in a much more modest neighborhood than I imagined. When I rang the doorbell, he opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting on the other side. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and the house behind him was simple, almost empty. "Mom, you came. Thank you. Thank you so much." He invited me in, offered coffee, was visibly nervous. "Sophia wasn't there. We separated 3 months ago," he said, and I felt neither pity nor satisfaction, just a strange neutrality. "Where's Clara?" I asked, and he said she was with Sophia's mother, that she'd be back later. We sat in the small living room, facing each other, and the initial silence was heavy, loaded with everything that hadn't been said. Caio took a deep breath and began, "Mom, I have no excuse for what I did. I have no justification. I have nothing that makes that seem less horrible than it was. I kicked you out of your own house, destroyed your things, humiliated you, and I did all of that while you were seeking peace at a spiritual retreat." His voice failed, and I saw tears starting to fall. I was an ungrateful son. I was cruel. I was everything bad a son can be to his mother. And the worst part is, I knew I was wrong, but I let Sophia convince me you were the problem, that we deserved the house just for us, that you'd be fine anywhere. He wiped the tears with the back of his hand, looking like a little boy again, and my heart tightened. When I received that notification from the lawyer and discovered the house was yours, I went into shock, not because I'd have to leave, but because I realized the dimension of my stupidity, my ingratitude, he continued. There I saw clearly. I'd kicked my mother out of her own house, had treated you like trash, and you had every legal and moral right to sue me, to destroy me. But you only asked for the house back. You were more generous with me than I ever was with you. He paused, looked at me with red eyes and said, "In the following months, everything fell apart. Sophia showed who she really was. When she saw we didn't have the house anymore, that I didn't earn as much as she thought, she started treating me exactly how she treated you. And I finally understood. She was a gold-digger daughter-in-law, always was, and I was too idiotic, too selfish, too blind to see." I heard all of that without interrupting, without showing emotion, just letting him say everything he needed to. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me or to justify what I did," he added quickly. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know I finally understood. I understood what I lost when I chose that woman over my own mother. I understood that all the sacrifice you made for me was real, was pure love, and I threw it all in the trash." He got up, went to a cabinet, and came back with a box. "I managed to recover some of your photos, some documents that had been stored. It's not much, but it's what's left." I took the box, and inside, I recognized some photos from my married days, certificates, old letters, small things, but with sentimental value. The gesture touched me, but not enough to erase everything that had happened. "Caio," I finally spoke, my voice firm but not harsh. "I appreciate you calling me here. I appreciate the apology, and I appreciate you saving these things. But you need to understand that what was done can't be undone." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking to go back to how it was before. I just wanted you to know I was wrong, that I regret it every day, and that if someday you want to meet Clara again, have some kind of contact, I'd really like that. Not for me, but because she loves you, talks about you to this day." That affected me. The little granddaughter, my Clara. "Caio, I'm going to be honest with you," I said, choosing each word carefully. "I don't know if I can completely forgive what you did. The pain was too great. The humiliation was too deep. But I also don't want to carry anger for the rest of my life." I took a deep breath. "So I'm going to propose something. We can try to rebuild some kind of relationship, but with very clear boundaries. You can visit me at the studio. You can bring Clara to see me. But on my time, in my space, on my terms. And if at any point you or anyone disrespects me again, I'm leaving and not coming back. This isn't a second chance here. It's a new beginning from scratch, as if we were two strangers learning to know each other again. Kaio nodded, tears falling nonstop. It's more than I deserve, Mom. Much more. And maybe it was. But I wasn't doing that for him. I was doing it for myself, because I discovered that holding grudges weighs more than forgiving with boundaries. I was doing it for Clara, who wasn't to blame for anything and deserved to know her grandmother. And I was doing it because, in the end, I'd built a life so strong, so complete, so mine, that now I could afford to be generous without fear of being stepped on again. 3 weeks later, Kaio showed up at the studio for the first time, with Clara by the hand. The girl looked at me with those huge eyes and said, "Grandma," before running into my embrace. We both cried, and even Kaio cried from the corner, and at that moment I understood that yes, new beginnings are possible. Not the way we imagine, but possible nonetheless. Months passed, and the new routine was establishing itself. Kaio and Clara visited me at the studio bi-weekly, always respectful, always within the boundaries I established. I taught Clara to do small stitching. She laughed when seamstress jumped on her lap, and little by little we built a new relationship, not based on the past, but on the present. Kaio never disrespected my boundaries again, never tried to manipulate emotionally, and I noticed he really had changed, or at least was trying to. And on a special night, the night of the second-floor opening of the studio, which I transformed into an exhibition space for pieces made by the students, I looked around and saw Donna Teresa chatting animatedly with the students, Clara playing with other children in the corner, Kaio helping to serve the guests, Mr. Alberto giving an emotional speech, and all those women who'd gone through the studio and rebuilt their lives there. That cruel note I found attached to the broken machine said, "You're no longer part of the family." And you know what? It was right. I was no longer part of that family, because I'd built a new one, much bigger, much stronger, made of choice and not blood, made of respect and not obligation. I was part of a family of warrior women, of courageous new beginnings, of emotional stories that became victories. And as I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the breeze coming through the window and the sound of happy conversations filling the space, I silently thanked for everything, even for the pain, even for the fall, because it was what taught me to fly. And so, that mother who was thrown on the street as if she was worth nothing, transformed her greatest pain into her greatest new beginning. She proved that age doesn't define strength, that humiliation can turn into dignity, and that sometimes we need to lose everything to discover we're much more than we imagined. The cruel note wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a life full of purpose, freedom, and deserved justice. And you, have you been through something similar? Have you ever had to start from scratch after a family betrayal? What would you do if you were in my place? Would you forgive with boundaries or cut contact forever? Share here in the comments, because your story can inspire other people who are going through the same thing. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on family, respect, and new beginnings, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Until the next story.